Greetings and salutations, everyone. This is Samsara Morgan, Executive Director of the Oakland Better Birth Foundation, Shipper Circle Community Doula Program, and the Better Birth Association of Harlem. And I have invited the most excellent human being in the world to help me discuss something that has just really been vexing me. It seemed my brow was furrowed. And so I think it requires some unpacking and some understanding. Please, Jewel, go ahead and introduce yourself as you'd like.
Hello, I am Jewel Buchanan Boone. I am a full spectrum doula here in the Oakland Bay area. I serve Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco, and I serve folks who are primarily Black, Brown, and Indigenous birthing people. I serve folks who are queer, folks who are looking to give birth inside of the hospital or outside of the hospital, and I'm also a full spectrum doula. So that means that I take care of people in their perinatal and their pregnancy, during their birth, during their postpartum period, and I also support folks through pregnancy, loss, abortion, and miscarriage. So I try to tap in and do as much as I can for folks in my community, and I'm always excited to be in conversation around broader issues and broader topics so that we can know what's going on. In the broader picture and things that kind of happen up here, but then affect us down here.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a guest?
No, we do not. Go away.
I should also mention that I am a friend of Shipper Circle. I have trained with you, Samsara, through the ICTC method before it was SMC. And I'm also a member of Roots of Labor Birth Collective. And I have, majority of my background is in public health douling and community douling, and less so in private practice.
Sounds excellent. So we're gonna just be like two birth workers trying to figure this thing out. I want to talk about the Senate Bill number 1237.
Mm-hmm.
And on the face of it, it appears that it should be a good thing.
Yes.
Because what it's supposed to do is to give dignity and respect to nurse midwives. How midwives function now in the state and in our country overall is that they are not independent practitioners.
Correct.
They work at the purview of the medical staff in any hospital that they're in. Mm-hmm. Right? So the midwife could have made a determination about how to handle their client and determinations about the client's care that could then be superseded by the doctor.
Yep.
Okay. And that's not okay. Midwife is a midwife, is studied and trained midwifery, and ought to have always been like an all around the world, the midwife is a midwife, right? And does not, it might be colleagues with a physician, might be colleagues with an obstetrician, might confer with them if she feels, or if the midwife feels that the client might need surgery, mm-hmm. right? But that doesn't mean she or the midwife relinquishes care or relinquishes control over their client unless the client fires them, correct?
That part.
Okay. So on the face of it, we look at this and we go, okay, well, that's kind of cool. That's a long time in coming. But as everything to do with patriarchal legislation, there are poison pills involved. And I really wanted your help in unpacking, what's the problem? Why would this be a problem?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a very interesting place to be right now. Just thinking of what we're experiencing in the broader world stage, not only with COVID, but COVID being a catalyst for so many of the changes that are happening very quickly. Right. And on the one hand, it's great that we're seeing how many things can happen so quickly. And on the other hand, because there's so much verve and enthusiasm for change, a lot of times we don't want to slow that train down and really unpack what it means to get the changes that we think we want. And I'm using the phrasing that we think we want very specifically, because it has been very uphill in midwives who, as you're saying, are experts in childbirth and caring for people through their reproductive span. And a lot of people were barely scratching the surface where your average person even knows what a midwife or a doula is. We're barely at the point where your average person knows that they have rights in their childbirth, that they don't have to see an OBGYN for everything body related, that they can be seen outside of a clinic setting, that there's care providers who will actually see them in their home, that they don't have to have their babies in stirrups, you know, like very basic things, that they even have rights during birth. Because when we're looking at these power structures, you walk into a hospital. I love Tomoko. She does the gown exercise. You put on the gown, that you don't even know that you can bring your own clothing into the hospital to labor in, you know. So we're at a very foundational phase. And meanwhile, we have this, and that's with birthing folks and your average, you know, community member. Meanwhile, we have this group of folks, you know, birth workers, midwives, people who know the reproductive struggle with a very specific agenda around birth and birthing and the change that they want to create and the change they want to embody in the world. All that to say that midwives, while they are the experts on normal, natural, physiological birth and things that happen in bodies and getting babies out of bodies, have historically have in more recent patriarchal colonized history been presided over by OBGYNs or some sort of usually male general practice doctor who has very limited experience in witnessing or even understanding pregnancy, physiology, and normal natural childbirth.
Absolutely. My feeling around that has been again, this is unique to the United States of America.
And we have this weird thing where we have this CPM certified professional or licensed midwife, or some people call lay midwifery, over here. And then you have this creation of the certified nurse midwife, which we know was rooted in the erasure and attempted removal of grand midwives, Black grand midwives in particular. So we're creating this hierarchy, which in and of itself is a very white supremacist notion. So where we're at in present time with this bill, SB1237, is that midwives have finally reached a point where a bill has come along through the Assembly, through the Senate, that says we no longer need physicians to preside over, to oversee certified nurse midwives. That specifically CNMs, not CPMs or LMs, specifically CNMs. And so on the surface, it sounds great. CNMs will have their full autonomy to practice their advanced practice nursing degree inside of and outside of hospital settings. Where it gets tricky and where the problem is that there are caveats put inside of the bill, small little conditions put inside of the bill that on the surface look very harmless, look very similar to what CNMs are and how CNMs have been conditioned to practice within the hospital. And so a lot of folks are looking at this on the surface and saying, oh, this is great. We don't need supervision. And the situations that are listed, you know, these bullet points that are listed in the bill don't seem so bad. And just to ground folks into what those are, the conditions in the bill says that the certificate to practice nurse midwifery, which is legal in all 50 states of America, to practice in and outside of hospital settings, are that specifically in California, if nurse midwives don't want supervision from a physician, they can do so and want to practice out of hospital, that they can do so as long as all of these conditions apply. One, that neither of the following are present. So 1A would be a pre-existing maternal disease or condition, creating risks higher than that of a low-risk pregnancy or birth, based on current evidence and accepted practice. 1B says disease arising from or during the pregnancy, creating risks higher than that of a low-risk pregnancy or birth, based on current evidence and accepting practice. I want to pause there because how that looks on the surface is CNMs usually take care of people with low-risk pregnancies. They're not OBGYNs. They are CNMs, low-risk pregnancy. What is determined and to be considered low risk can actually change at any time, because risk is defined by the body that accepts what risk is or what risk is not. So that's the first issue, is that what is considered low risk can change. The other piece is that if you're looking at marginalized, impacted communities who are already struggling for culturally attuned and just any sort of basic adequate care, let's just be honest, the majority of Black and Brown people are going to fall into categories that put them into higher risk, because these categories are, again, determined either by the care provider or by their governing organization. The other two pieces, or the other bullet points on here, is that there has to be a singleton fetus, so only one baby inside of the birthing person. There has to be a cephalic presentation at the onset of labor, which means that baby has to be head down, that they cannot be breached for whatever reason. They cannot be breached. If you're going to have your baby outside of the hospital, they determine that to be a high-risk pregnancy. The gestational age of the fetus is at least 37 completed weeks of pregnancy and less than 42 completed weeks of pregnancy at the onset of labor. And that labor is spontaneous or induced in an outpatient setting. So you can't have gone into the hospital, received some sort of medical induction, and then left and been sent home, and you can still be seen by your CNM. So this is all for out of hospital midwifery care, for anybody to be seen by their CNM. And this impacts a lot of people as it's written, because actually I'm gonna take a breath here. We're just gonna sit with that, and I wanna pass it on over to you. What really agitated you when this bill came down and you were made aware? What did you see?
Good question. Well, you know, thank you for asking that question. I'm always on the warpath when there's legislation. And I'm always on the warpath, especially when there's legislation regarding birthing people's rights, or those who support birthing people's rights in any way, shape, or form, which would be midwives, right? And I think part of the point that you're making is that the bar is set for so low and is being lowered all the time for what a midwife can do, like the full range of what midwifery care is. Like, okay, in this state, there were twins being born at home. There were not a raft of twins dead in home births. Okay, midwives got free, allegedly, from physician supervision as well a few years ago. And in that same bill, they lost the ability to deliver twins. What do these two things have to do with each other? Nothing. So, like, you know, so I was tracking this for that same reason. And then when it was going to come up to be discussed in the legislature yesterday, unfortunately, I heard about it at the very last minute. I did have an opportunity to call in and say I oppose it as written. But, even myself, like, okay, where's the poison pill? What does it look like? Because it is written in a very slim shady fashion. It's very fuzzy, the language in this bill.
Hmm. And I like to play a little bit of like the optimist here and say that when I see things written like this and I want to match it with a good intention, um, it feels like they sat down with some lawyers, because that's what legislators are, and tried to create language that was the least inhibiting as possible while still trying to put on these bumpers, like if we're thinking of a bowling aisle, the bumpers on the side.
Right.
Um, and so on one outset, and that's probably and I think side tangent, what is coming up for me and what I witnessed on that call yesterday and hearing and being a part of the legislative process, because we were both on this call,
Yeah.
is what stood out to me from the people who called to support the bill, is where is your midwifery rooted?
Right.
Because if your midwifery is not rooted in liberation, like that your midwifery is rooted in, we don't need this stuff to tell us how. And that doesn't mean people should not be held accountable. That doesn't mean that there aren't certain lanes for us to stay in. I'm not a car mechanic, but I do know how to open the hood, like don't bring it to me. That's common sense and judgment. And I find it really frustrating that we get these headlines and these articles of midwives going off the rails and doing things they shouldn't, and a baby dies, when we have a maternal and infant mortality rate that is tracked and rooted primarily in the hospital system,
Exactly.
with most people being tended to by OBGYNs and other negligent folks who just so happen to work in hospitals. And all of a sudden what hits the paper and who's getting the ramifications is these midwives who've gone off the rails and they've done things they shouldn't and all this kind of shenanigans.
Exactly.
And so when I see these orgs like signing on for, this is a great bill, it's like, where are you coming from? Are you coming from the we can fix it later mentality? Or that's a small concession? I have to go back and reread the bill that passed, what was it, 2-3 years ago, around license and CPMs. And the concessions that were made. And I understand on the political side, there was a lot of bullying that happened within ranks and from the legislative process itself, that folks felt that that was the best they could get to get that bill passed, that they had to concede things. But for me, and my understanding of our political processes, we don't get to fix things later, because while we're fixing things later, the impact of what is set in place is already impacting lives.
And impacting Black and Brown lives more than any other population.
Yes.
Chronically.
Yes. And I'm thinking, as a queer person, what does it mean for my trans siblings who have gone through different hormonal therapies and so on and so forth? So we're talking about people who have existed since the beginning of time, that the medical industrial complex does not understand, who will then categorize folks as quote unquote high risk when that may or may not actually be true.
Right.
And that's why, in our offline conversation, I was talking about leave it up to the body, the overseeing body, to grow with the sign of the times, because it's so much easier to change policy than legislation.
Right.
But yeah, where does it leave single folks? Where does it leave marginalized folks, migrant folks, so on and so forth? And we know that Black people and Black birthing people in particular, the levels of stress, even if we had perfect lives, the levels of stress that reside within our bodies will inherently put us into high-risk categories.
Yeah, so unless you're going to cure racism and white supremacy, you can't be doing legislation like this
Mm-hmm.
because you are chronically going to be excluding these groups of people over and over and over and having your little seminars wondering why Black women are dying.
And a panel. Or also someone brought up who called in, she said that she had multiple children with her midwives, and that she was over the age of 40. And so
Yeah.
we know that these baddie doctors call that geriatric pregnancy.
Geriatric pregnancy.
As if someone's great grandmother is pregnant. And if she is, let that lady go.
She got pregnant on her own steam, good, what?
But yeah, they call it geriatric pregnancy and all these things. So who decided that 40 was a geriatric age or an unsafe age to have a child, when we know the average American woman right now is waiting till about 36 or 37 years old to have their first child, and that most of them will, or many of them will be having multiple children depending on how they space out their pregnancies.
So what I'm getting, and correct me if I'm off base here, is that part of the concern is what I'm feeling as a concern is because this law is saying like this is codified per today's standards. Today's standards are hella low.
Hella low.
So the bar is way down there. And so there is no room for growth and innovation. There's no room for, not even about growth, but it's restoring midwifery to what midwifery ought to and always has been. So we have all of these, a home birth midwife might take on an obese client knowing certain things about that client and making the determination, I'm going to help this person anyway. And these are the reasons why I feel like this is going to be okay. And nurse midwives should have the same autonomy.
Yes.
Because that she too, or he too, or they too is a midwife, and they get to say, I have spoken to this person, I've taken their history, blood pressure, pulse, all the stuff, and I'm gonna facilitate their birth. I'm gonna assist their birth.
Mm-hmm. And if something I'm unfamiliar with, or if something changes that is out of my capability, then I will refer, or I will enter into more collaborative care to fully support this person in their birthing journey.
Seems so simple, don't it?
It does. It does. And I'm thinking of, because I love Grey's Anatomy. That's my show. There's no, at least I haven't seen it. There's no law on the books that, is just for cardiothoracic surgeons that says if this new development and the person and so on and so forth, then you cannot potentially perform this life-saving surgery. No one's saying that.
Peace. There is not a law preventing innovation. This is, you get to be McDreamy, who I was madly in love with. Why did they kill McDreamy? I'm still trying to get over it. But he was supposed to be, he would do things that no one else would ever do.
Right.
Right? And so if he was restrained in doing that, people would be dying left and right. He would take a risk. Every once in a while, McDreamy didn't lose a client. It was terrible. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, he would do something earth-shattering, and he's running around the world teaching other people how to do it.
That part. I actually think of, I want to say it's Alta Bates, who has the wing that's named after, she's got an Indian last name, very amazing doctor. And the reason that the wing is named after her is because she's so amazing at C-sections that she created a new technique in order for this life-saving surgery.
Yeah, it's a surgery suite.
Be done better and more effective and so on and so forth. That's how powerful her work is. And right. Of course, she's an OBGYN.
Right.
And so just like the oddness that, who gets to save, who gets to live, who gets to thrive. I don't even want to put in like a savior complex, but who gets to thrive is such an interesting notion when you're looking at legislation and policy.
And who gets to innovate? Who gets to elevate? Who gets to empower and be empowered?
And
Those
also,
are,
why is midwifery, like, it's still in this really frustrating notion because it is such a traditional practice that in so many ways it's still perceived as being primitive. Like, if you talk
right.
to other like medical folks, even if you're talking about certified nurse midwives, there's sometimes that notion like, oh, that's cute. I'm an OBGYN or whoever, you know, not to villainize
Well,
OBs.
well, that's the
Um,
whole thing. Like it's not spiffy enough. Like it won't get you into the country club.
but everyone
It
who's
won't get
in
you
the
on the
country
golf
club
team.
came through a body.
And there was this whole thing too, it's American patriarchal, Puritan wackiness around women aren't to be trusted in a certain way anyway.
Right, right.
And women certainly aren't to be trusted with the power of their own persons. Birthing people are not allowed to be trusted with the power of their own persons,
No.
you know. And birth is just really what those low class people do anyway. People is always having sex and having babies there.
Right. Unless it's like some,
Unless it's a 1% baby
yep.
or 1% situation.
And then they get to brag about, oh, I had this and I had that and this happened and they glorify it. And so it's just like
The
it's such a
people who
funny
will be a
perspective.
burden on society as opposed to the people who will give to society.
Yes. And ironically enough, when we're looking at especially late stage capitalism, the people who are a burden on society are typically those who think very highly of themselves, but
Yeah, I know.
those who are the quote unquote burden of society, who are actually keeping the world going, who are actually risking their lives, that are actually bearing the brunt of this pandemic, and compounded with the notion that there are pregnant people who are going to be subject to all of this, who are still on the front lines, who don't have the provision and protection of class and quarantine and health care. We're still in a country that doesn't have universal health care.
How about that?
Like,
How about that?
like if there wasn't a commitment from some people, and it's hard enough for people with insurance to get tests and get tested.
And to get information about your bodies that you can feel safe about, because of if the driving factor is capitalism, you have to always distrust the system. What you're being recommended, is it really for my best good, or is it really for the cost differential to the hospital or the doctor that's recommending it?
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. So here's a question for you. If you had to rewrite this bill, what would you what would you have it say?
That CNMs should have no, they should not be required. There is no physician oversight mandated or required for certified nurse midwives to practice their full scope of practice inside of and outside of the hospitals. Because what a lot of folks also don't know about CNMs in particular, while I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the scope of practice for certified professional midwives is specifically during kind of childbearing time, when someone is pregnant, having a baby, and shortly postpartum.
It could be more, but people don't tend to come to midwives except for that period.
Okay. Because I was looking at a chart that kind of had the scopes of practice, but yeah, CNMs are able to do things like from the time you have your first period to the time that you are laid into the ground, they can see you, provide primary care, prescribe birth control or whatever other medications. Sometimes you end up going in for one thing and they see something else, so they have prescriptive authority to really like care for you as a whole person. So I'm also interested in the way that this bill is written, that how would that impact their other scope of practice in being able to provide whole person care? Um, and maybe that's further down in the legislation. I have to reread it, but
I
yeah,
haven't
short
started
version,
yet.
CNM should be able to exercise their full scope of care in all settings, because that is what their training and their degree and everything else that they do has trained and qualified them to do. So there shouldn't be we'll give you this, but we're going to take, it's going to come at this liberation in this format. You can just give it. That's the one thing that we're being shown in this COVID time, is that there doesn't need to be stipulations on liberation.
Right.
Things can just be given because it's the right thing to do.
And in a way, it's sad that it has to come to a law to make it happen.
Oh, yeah.
Surgeons, no one says we don't need qualified surgeons in birth. For the folks who need them, boy howdy, so happy that we have them, right? But not to the extent of the number of people being C-section in this country. It's
Yeah.
obscene, And so the countries that don't spend as much money, how much money spent when you have qualified surgeons treating yeast infections? What sense does that make?
And the reality is that most yeast infections can be treated at home through non-pharmacological means.
How about that? We're going there too. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. If I had my way, it would be a simple document. This is many, many, many pages, and it'd be a much more simple document. And it would say that we recognize, this law recognizes the nurse midwife as an autonomous healthcare provider.
Primary care provider.
Primary care provider. Caring for all the issues of reproduction, and we can list it all out, all the things. If you want to do that, that's fine. And like with any other profession, has the right to innovate, has the right to teach others new skills.
I really love how you are focusing on this innovation notion. Give me 1 second. Oh, I brought my plug up, but my computer, I don't know what I did with it. But I really like how you're focusing on this notion of innovation, because what does it mean to have Black, Brown, and Indigenous futures? And how do we get there if we are not allowed to innovate? When we're thinking of disparities and all of the stuff, I don't even want to bring that all in, but when we think of all of the things that not only we are subject to and encounter and embody, but all of the things we could be and all of the things we could change and create in this process, that innovation, and it's so funny because innovation is, again, thrown into this elitist structure of like tech companies get to innovate and and innovative medicine and all of this, big buzzword. But when it comes down to the practice of it, who is entitled to innovation?
The way I see it is innovation, because I believe in the cyclical nature of life. And right now in this country, for quite a while now, birth has been at the bottom of the barrel as far as thought and care and quality of care. It's been horrible in this country. So to go around to innovation means that you get to actually get to go back to full circle, going back to more an indigenous kind of care. It's like a healing of the practice.
Yes.
So go back to where it was at a higher level, to the extent that enslaved people were able to have better mortality rates than Black people today. Okay, so if folks are allowed to get in there and to really explore the beauty and the science of midwifery, it will only elevate the care that's given and save lives. Keeping it on the same level that it's at now is hideous. And fighting to maintain the status quo is hideous.
That part. That part. Yeah, it also seemed very counterintuitive in the way that this bill is written to have so much dialogue around folks needing access to care. We need to diversify our workforce and so on and so forth. And for our folks who don't know what it would take to achieve a certified midwife, certified nurse midwife designation or degree, it's over 3 years of a master's designation. So you would have to either be a registered nurse or do a master's entry program in which you would get your nursing degree and your midwifery degree together. And financially, you know, it's over $100,000 of education. On the low end, it's you know, roughly between $120,000 for just that degree. And that's not including if you had to put yourself through a post-baccalaureate program or pay out of pocket for science prerequisites or anything that you didn't previously do. That doesn't factor in childcare if you're a parent, rent, anything, none of it. But it's over $100,000. So then you're telling folks, that go through all of this thing over here because that's what required for you to be seen as valid and to do this work, you know, through this particular modality. And then we're gonna to be able to practice everywhere. And then if you don't practice in the little box that we put you in, then here's all the other stuff that, you know, here's all the other things that will impede you from exercising all of that education, schooling, and experience to improve your community. So it's such a funky, but if you have privilege and your parents paid for your school or you have the resources and so on and so forth, no tea, no shade, but the reality that you're viewing life and lived experience through, there is a very specific engineer reason why there are not more Black certified nurse midwives.
Exactly.
And there's a reason why there is a shortage of midwives in this country. And there is a reason why certified professional midwives are not allowed to practice inside of the hospital, even though if they are Black and brown and the majority of the people that they serve are Black and brown actually end up in the hospital, whether it's because they have higher risk pregnancies or it's because it's the most affordable option. So that's why I take issue with this particular part of the bill, because it actually exacerbates the quagmire that we're in, and it's not solution oriented, it's adding more things.
Not at all. It gets a certain subset enough of feeling good about themselves so that they feel good about themselves, but it's not looking at the profession as a whole.
Right.
And it's not looking at the entire community of birthing people that would be served by midwives.
And it's also not a male-dominated field and specialty in particular, because men don't tend to tell men what to do.
It's, you know.
If anything, they like to devise ways of what else can they do. So I think for me, going back to your previous question about what I would change in this bill, I don't know if it would make it into the bill, but kind of in the spirit in which these things are created, because I believe this bill was really thought of with good intention, with high hopes, with, you know, best future visioning in sight, but it's created by people who aren't grounded into other folks' realities. And it doesn't make them bad people. It just means that's the room that they sit in. You know, that's the chairs that they sit in. But we have to be able to coalition build in such a way that it's what else can we do? How can we innovate? Not pitting people against each other. Well, I went here for this and that, and I practiced this and that. No, what else can we do together in collaboration? And also, where are the birthing people who were, because I can guarantee you, not very many folks, if you went into the community, one could tell you the difference between a CNM versus a CPM, unless they were educated in it. But two, if they said, hey, here's extra people who are able to help you, your average birthing person wouldn't say, oh, well, I want their help, but only if I look like all of these things specifically.
Right.
So that's like, if you're actually looking at improving health outcomes and birth outcomes, and also, I don't know too many reframe, because they called in and endorsed the bill.
Right.
You know, but from a common sense perspective, I don't know too many midwives in my personal circle who would say, yes, I would like to practice, but I don't want to practice without this criteria present.
Right.
You know, and so I think that's where the shift needs to happen, is that you have to center. You have to center and dignify people's experience, expertise, and choice to be able to, hey, if we need it on the books, because there are states that don't have legislation around midwifery on the books, they might have a provision that it's legal in the state, but how it's legal is where the gray area and then you have the midwife did this, the midwife did that. So I understand wanting to have something on the books that says, we can practice full autonomy, no physician oversight, let us do our thing, just so we're clear. But that's literally as simple as it should be.
Definitely not all these pages.
So many pages.
Definitely not all these pages. And just, you know, it is very frustrating, because literally lives depend on legislation like this. Being done right, being clear, being forward thinking, and not being selective in scope, like not just coming at it from a white middle class construct or a white middle class male construct. It's got to be, you know, from an indigenous construct, from a Black construct, from a transgendered construct, from all of humanity, because that's what birth is all about. Yes, it's all about all the time. And so, you know, I know, you know, I feel kind of bad for Senator Dodd. I think he was, you know, there's a little pout on, like, about, you know, we're trying to do a good thing. And I appreciate your kindness. You're very kind. And it reminds me to be kind, which is the way I like to roll most of the time. And, you know, but then the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yes, it is. I need to pause you for 2 seconds.
So while I am paused, I want to talk about an organization called CFAM, California Families for Access to Midwives. They are doing a lot of work on this issue, and I would really like anybody who listens to this video and wants further clarification, whether you agree with the conversation that Jewel and I are having or not. You can speak to the folks at CFAM to get further clarification. I know I've been told that they need people to help them with what needs to happen next with this legislation around rewriting things, perhaps. I mean, there was lots of conversation around changing language. And so maybe this first step opened the door for more corrections and changes to continue to happen. So I was excited to hear that, even though irritated at the same time. The contact person over at CFAM that I have is Teresa Yu. And CFAM is CFAM. Look them up online. And please be in touch with them if you have questions or concerns about this organization. their website is under reconstruction right now. Hopefully it'll be available soon so you can find their good history in being on top of issues like this. You might want to join them. If you are a person who's had a baby and you're wanting to help other people have access to midwifery care in the state, they're a good group to be part of. I'm actually going to be offering them my assistance when we're done with this lovely call. Is there anything that you wanted to say, Jewel, to kind of wrap up our conversation?
I'm really excited for all of the pushes forward, but we definitely have our work cut out for us. I know a lot of folks that I have conversations with, sometimes they're very surprised because this is how I talk. It doesn't matter the context. We've known each other for quite some time, and I always just have to show up the same way. I'm very plain spoken.
Yeah.
And with that,
it's called having integrity.
Yes, it is. And while I'm so happy and excited for these things to be happening, also it just really speaks to the broader need for more discourse between these, because like the folks who called in are organizations and thought leaders, or people who are considered thought leaders. I actually want to reframe that. There are people who are considered thought leaders in reproductive justice, that are organizational leadership and heads and things of that nature, that are respected. And if you Googled certain topics that these organizations or the people who called on behalf of those organizations, they are very well known.
Definitely.
So when we're looking at dominant narrative, and when we're looking at the way we talk about all of this, there is an onus of responsibility on these people to be much more grounded than they are. And I think that's the gentlest way that I know how to say it, because there was names of people I recognized, and at first I was like, oh, and then I was like, whoa, wow, these people of all folks would support this. And again, like, there is such a privilege in being able to fix it later, quote unquote. I want to clarify for the folks who are listening in on this, that the bill made its way into the Assembly, into the Senate, and that they are then going to take it back to the floor to do some of the amending. And to do more of the discussion around it. That's my understanding of where it is in the process. So it didn't pass flat out, but it has been moved through to such a point that they can then go back in and start reworking this.
Yeah.
This is when we have to be most vocal and reach out to our communities in particular and let them know what it means.
We should be talking to our legislatures about this bill, yes?
Yeah, our legislatures, but also you and I, we found out last minute. I found out T-minus 12 hours, that's how these things work as well. That's the machine and the process.
Right.
Where are these organizations doing outward advocacy around it, and why they're coming up with their stances. But yeah, I think to wrap it up is there's a lot of work that we have to do. And I understand the impetus. I understand why there are certain folks who happen to be Black and brown or indigenous who do not want to engage in broader discourse with white-led organizations, and for safety, for so many other things, for trauma triggers, etc. And for those of us who do have the tolerance, the willingness, and the capability to do so, we have to fill that gap to continue having the conversations with these broader organizations, because if we do not, we are going to be erased, we are going to be silenced, and then they're going to say, but the midwives said.
Right.
And that's not true. Or some midwives.
Right. Some midwives
listen to. And so we have to continue to do that unpacking and undoing that and doing that work, and also taking care of ourselves and each other and our communities, it's a very, there's a lot of things that we have to hold up. But I ultimately feel that this is California. We're making steps in the right direction. This is powerful, and we have the opportunity to harness this power. For those folks who are interested in becoming birth workers, part of the work I do every single day, I was having a call with my workmates, and I said, and we're actually talking about what we want to put in postpartum gifts. And I said, I could give you my list of what I would put in a postpartum gift, but I'm intentionally just going to facilitate this conversation and take a step back, because we are all postpartum doulas now.
Right.
You know, anyone can be a birth doula, anyone can be a support, anyone can do these things. So in that centering and empowerment model,
Right.
it's not the folks who went to the trainings and have the hats and the pins and went to the conference. It's all of us on the ground who have to be having these conversations. And by doing so, we will inherently create what we need independent of these structures. But for the folks who are civically engaged, we cannot have incremental progress, fix it later, we can give concessions progress, because that bill, how you were talking about the CPMs and LMs,
Right.
when was it rewritten? When was it gone back to be taken care of, to add in the things that were left out and to take out the things that were inherently oppressive and restrictive?
Yeah, and the way it was advertised at the time was the push was, oh, having CPMs or LMs, if we're talking about the state, not have to have this physician supervision thing, which was an albatross around their necks for forever. It was unattainable, and when it was attainable, it was very quickly demolished, right? And then underneath it, though, was like, okay, yeah, we'll let you do this, but then there's all this other stuff that you can't do anymore, or you can do differently. That we get to legislate how you do your art and craft. And it goes back to your original question, like, who goes to the brain surgeon and says, no, you cannot cut laterally. You have to do this like that. What other profession will endure that? A plumber doesn't, no, you don't come, you please better not tell a plumber how to fix your sink. Because he will walk out of your house and still charge you $200, you know.
That is so true. He'll take it apart and leave it, and you still have to pay.
And you're, bye, sue me. Give me a bad Yelp review. I don't care. But so what this constant, I mean, this disrespect of what is seen in the wide world as women's work, that's the big piece there. And in a culture where women's lives and people of color's lives, transgendered folks, indigenous folks, their lives don't have the same value. So even, it's so ironic that even this bill that is brought forth, I agree, with good intentions, still is so mucked up. Heartbreaking.
It is. And to see the amount of just support when we have the opportunity to slow this down and do it right.
Absolutely. And open the floodgates for all kinds of beautiful birth experiences for people and babies who live past their first birthday.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes.
Gorgeous little souls that can do beautiful things on this earth. Less traumatized citizens. You know, imagine. Anyway, I'll hold that vision. We'll both hold that vision in our hearts for good birth workers that we are.
Yes.
Beautiful, abundant birth, no trauma, empowered, loving parents, you know, and a peaceable society, a loving society. Because when people are born like that, they tend to live like that.
Yeah. You know, we live, I think, was it you who taught me? We birth how we live.
That has been my experience.
Yeah, we birth how we live. So if we are stressed out, we're run down, we're not eating well, so on and so forth. That directly translates. And for the folks, you know, you can tell those mellow babies whose mamas were Zen meditation and, you know, still having a good time, but
Exactly.
they weren't stressed in the way that so many of us are. And they have these, you know, very lovely, sometimes things go left, you know, that's with life, but there is a temperamental ability to adjust and to be able to flow. And you can see those marked changes when that is taken away or when someone even attempts to try.
Yeah.
So yeah, just
Well,
sending love to all of my, you know, my midwife friends.
yeah.
You
Nice
know, in a
to-
few years, they will be my midwife colleagues. And also, I don't know if our viewers know, or the folks who will be watching this, but you are, you're doing your LM CPM, correct?
I am indeed in the process, yes.
And I'll be applying to my CNM program this year.
Oh, so we will get to definitely maintain our collegial relationship.
Yes. And so this is, you know, for the viewers out there, you know, this is two folks who are pursuing different paths with very much of the similar intentions,
Absolutely.
being
Absolutely.
able to talk about these things in such a way.
Absolutely. And a similar devotion around, you know, around being a birth worker. It
Mhm.
is, in my view, it is a ministry. It
Yes.
is a way of giving back to the earth.
Yeah.
And we want to help our legislative folks see it like that.
And
And if
it's,
they need to write words about it, those words need to reflect that.
yes. And, you know, it's a blessing to have these angels of change inside of our legislature. I think, you know, when things get politicized, it's very easy to start picking sides and ideologies and really losing out on the fact that there are folks who are put in these positions
Right.
for reasons. And, you know, we're blessed to have them as long as they have a listening ear.
Exactly.
Um, and
Exactly.
hopefully we can talk to Mr. Dodds and say, come on, just send him this video and just say, hey, here
Yeah,
is a
yeah,
snippet for
we
you to listen.
appreciate your feedback, Senator Dodd.
Yes, so
And
we have
we
some of
appreciate your work. And we, you know, and we appreciate your work.
our
There's,
own.
there's other things that he could be focusing on. You know, we are
Right.
grateful. We are not trying to be ungrateful. We're
hmm
just wanting full scope, my friend.
Right. Meanwhile, you've got folks who are yelling at women and doing all sorts of things within the full range of their practice who are contributing to, you know, a lot of the things that we're trying to solve, particularly with this bill. So,
There's so much.
so
So
much, but
we're
we'll take what
still,
we can
it's
get.
still in process. It's not over till it's over.
Not at all.
We need to put our minds and hearts on it, our phone calls, our emails, our participating, getting in touch with the folks at CFAM, and putting your good voice forward. And we'll see, and let's hope for the very best and bank on that good intention. I want
Yeah.
to thank you, Jewel, so much for giving me this time. I really enjoyed talking to you. Um, I'm
Likewise.
sure folks will enjoy listening to us. I want to invite folks to please like or comment on this video. It will soon be on Oakland Better Birth Foundation's YouTube. Feel free to have your conversation. I'll check in and chime in as needed. Please like the video. Please subscribe to us so you can hear other birth-worthy conversations. And have a blessed and wonderful day. Stay well, stay happy, stay home, and pray that we'll be able to be out and be able to hug each other on the street very, very soon.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you for having me. It's always a blessing and a pleasure to be in communication and community with you.
Thank you, Jewel. Adios.
See you.
Bye-bye.